Hey folks, this is Kalani. We have some major changes coming our way for several Shadowlands endgame systems. Conduits will have their weekly lock on your ability to reset them removed. The More Zone might actually be something worth spending time in, and if you're going to pick your Covenant based entirely upon DPS and the overall best performance gains, you might just want to hold on for a second because Blizzard is turning everything on its head in regards to balance. Let's sit down and dig through the big Shadowlands update post that the dev team just put out to see what lies in store over the next few weeks. Now before we jump in, be sure to pop by our live stream sometime over at twitch.tv/KalaniTV. We stream every Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday and Saturday, and we always love chatting with you wonderful folks, so I hope to see you soon. I know a lot of players were curious to see what Blizzard would do with the extra time they bought themselves with the release date delay. Will we see any actual changes to some of the most talked about features, the covenants, the conduits and all the various restrictions placed on those systems? Well yes, we will. The weekly cooldown on resetting your conduits will be removed and replaced. I wish we could stop that sentence at just removed, but yes, sadly the dev team have come up with another way to restrict the system, but thankfully it's not quite as bad. So the way the system used to work was pretty simple. You could put your chosen conduits into your soulbinds and lock them in, and if you ever wanted to change anything, you'd have to reset the entire soulbind, even if you just wanted to change one or two conduits in there. You could only reset your soulbind once per week, and the cooldown reset with the weekly reset. That literally restricted you to one set of conduit changes per week. Didn't matter if you wanted to change the whole set, didn't matter if you wanted to change one. You can only change something once per week. That restriction is being removed entirely, so you won't have to worry about a cooldown anymore, but you will have to keep track of something else called Conduit Energy. This is what the blue post says. When first unlocked, the Forge of Bonds will be charged with 10 Conduit Energy, and placing a conduit into a socket will consume a single charge. Conduit Energy recharges at a rate of 1 per day, up to a cap of 10, and adding a new conduit to your collection immediately restores 1 Conduit Energy as well. Our goal with this change is to ensure that, especially when players are acquiring new conduits and only have access to a small number of soulbinds and conduit slots, all players feel free to try out new upgrades and to adjust their soulbinds to support multiple specializations or activities. After the initial collection period for a given character, 7+ swaps per week should allow for more adaptation to suit specific roles or activities, while still requiring thoughtful decisions about how to customize each soulbind for your playstyle preferences. Okay, cool. So the cooldown is gone, and now you have to use this Conduit Energy to slot things in. You start with 10, you can't ever hold more than 10, and you recharge this stuff at a rate of 1 per day. So if you never change a conduit more than once a day, you should never see a restriction on your conduits at all. That's kind of neat. Anytime you learn a new conduit, you also gain 1 energy. This allows you to swap to that conduit immediately if that's what you want to do, even if you had used up all of your energy previously. But bear in mind that it would cost you an additional energy if you wanted to swap back to your initial setup. Overall, this new system would be less restrictive. You can swap individual conduits instead of only being able to reset the entire thing once per week, which was awful. You can also save up your energy to make lots of changes a couple times per week, for those big swaps to a different spec. And it also allows for experimentation as you gather more and more conduits. When you compare it to the strict, inflexible once per week reset, this new Conduit Energy system is going to be significantly better in pretty much every way possible. If you only play one role or you only play one of your specs, I don't think you'll run into any issues whatsoever with this new system and swapping conduits. You should be able to swap between your best AoE conduit setup and your best single target conduit setup without too many problems. You can also probably swap conduits to match different boss encounter types without expending all of your energy. And if you want to swap between a raid setup and a Mythic Plus dungeon setup several times a week, that could also be doable as well, if you play the same spec. Where you will still most definitely run into issues with this change is if you play multiple roles or multiple specializations. Swapping one conduit a day isn't really a lot when you consider that you have 4 conduits in any given soulbind pathway. Any finesse or endurance conduits might not be an issue because they're all class-wide, and changing your utility or defensive conduits might be considered a waste of conduit energy anyway because they're not the impactful ones. They aren't increasing your throughput, be that damage or healing. So I imagine most of us will focus on the potency soulbinds. The major problem you're going to run into is that each spec has access to 4 different potency conduits. So if you only play one spec, you can always use 3 out of your 4 potency conduits. That leaves just 1 that you would need to change at a time depending on what you want to do. Very easy with this new system, but if you play multiple specs and you want to use a different soulbind for more than one, you have to expend 3 conduit energy just to swap your 3 spec specific potency conduits, and that's just to swap specs. If you want to change conduits in that spec to play around with AoE versus single target versus PvP and PvE or whatever else you want to tinker with, that is going to cost you more energy, and there's no way to earn more of this stuff outside of collecting more conduits. When you have every conduit you can gather, it is a strict rate of 1 per day, and that really isn't going to be enough for everyone. You also have to ask the question, is this energy per spec? Is it per soulbind, or do we just have 10 energy max and 1 energy per day to work with? Because if you have 10 energy max for your entire class, spread across your 3 soulbinds, and across potentially your 4 specs, that's going to penalize anyone who wants to be efficient in multiple roles and specs, even if you use different soulbinds. You have access to 3 different soulbinds no matter what, so you could try to save some of your energy by using 1 soulbind per spec, right? Set up one of them for tanking, set up another one for healing, set up another for DPS. Then you shouldn't have to change your conduits too much. Now this probably won't be the most ideal setup. One of these soulbinds will most likely be the best for every single spec. So you are still sacrificing something by doing this. You are automatically not at your peak efficiency. But if you only have 1 energy per day, you would have to choose which soulbind and which spec to change something in. You literally wouldn't be able to change something for your tank setup, your healing setup, and your DPS setup in the same day. I know the dev team wants us to make some meaningful choices with some of these systems, but I don't think having to choose between your roles and specs is ever going to feel good. If you want to be able to swap to a tank to maybe go tank a couple dungeons, you want to be able to do that as best as you can. Instead, you're going to have to choose between, well, do I make this change to help out my raid with DPS, or do I make this change for my tanking setup instead so I can do better in these dungeons? So the good news here is that this conduit energy system is significantly far and away better than the weekly reset that we were worried about. There's almost no comparison here. Everyone will have way more freedom of choice and of experimentation, and I'm happy to see the restrictions at least reduced. But I still think that any restriction on this system is unnecessary. It's also kind of frustrating that while the dev team has obviously listened to our concerns, they're making changes, that's great. But this update just moves the goalposts. Instead of being very restrictive, it's now just restrictive. Time and effort had to go into making this decision, which could have maybe been better spent elsewhere on the expansion. They had to look at the current system, decide it wasn't going to work well enough, think and talk about how they could change it, brainstorm, pick a good enough idea, get it working in game, and introduce everything needed in the UI, the conduit system, and everything else. Personally, I think if they just removed the restrictions, almost everyone would be happier. The system would work better, they would have more freedom to balance soulbind talents and traits and conduits themselves, and then just move on to something else, something that needs more attention. I do understand some of their reasoning. They don't want everyone to hark back to their covenant, change every conduit to suit every boss encounter just for that tiny percentage increase, and they don't want a semi or loosely restrictive system like what we had with Azerite swapping in Battle for Azeroth. The dev team saw that players will do almost anything to gain those small increases. In BFA, some high-end raiders was spending millions of gold on Azerite respecs. Absolutely ludicrous, but obviously the gold cost didn't really fix the problem there, but having a strict limit on how many times you can change conduits per week or per day means that once you run out of swaps, you're locked in. There is no crazy cost associated with it, and you have to make some hard choices to make the most of what you have. So I get it, I do, but you have to weigh up the pros and cons of any given decision, especially when it's going to affect everyone's gameplay at endgame. This isn't just something that affects raiders or the dungeoneers. This is something key and pivotal in Shadowlands. Everybody will be playing with it. Personally, I don't think the benefits outweigh the negatives on keeping this system restrictive. These changes are better than what we had, for sure, but I think no restrictions would be better still. The Conduit Energy stuff should be available to test in an upcoming beta build, so when it arrives we can play around with it and see just how everything pans out. But that's not the only change coming to the Shadowlands beta. The Maw Zone has been a bit of a question mark for a while now. We know it's supposed to be this bad place that we don't really want to spend a lot of time in, and if we spend too long here, the jailer's going to get angry and potentially kill us. And then with the recent vendor update, we also saw that it's going to be used as a bit of a grindy zone to earn sockets for gear and potentially an alternate pathway to earn conduits, or at least something of an upgrade to catch up for conduits and conduit upgrades. But there still isn't really much to do here. The main objective is to rescue souls for your Covenant once per week. That's one of the renowned quests, so you definitely will want to do that. But that's kind of it. That's all the direction you really get in the Maw. That's the only major quest or objective that brings you down here repeatedly. There are rares scattered around that you can kill, and world quests hidden in the zone that you have to go out of your way to find. Both of those will reward you with miscellaneous goodies and the Stygia currency used on the Venari vendor. But the main complaint about the Maw Zone was quite simply, we don't know what we're supposed to be doing here. There's very little guidance outside of Venari's daily quests, and it just looks like a big zone without much going on. And the dev team agrees this is an issue. So they're going to look into increasing the visual distinction and combat gameplay variety across the different areas of the Maw, as well as adding in new events and interactions within the world. That sounds kind of cool. Some areas of the Maw look amazing, so hopefully we're given more reasons to actually get out there and explore. The dev team also wants to give players who journey to the Maw a bit more direction in what there is to do and why you might want to do it, while still retaining the sandbox feel of the zone as a whole. So more updates to the Maw Zone are incoming. Stay tuned and we'll cover anything exciting when the beta build comes out. And then the last point this update post touched on was Covenant and class balance. Some very large tuning changes have been happening over the last couple of weeks. I know the Warlocks are probably quite in tune with this because their Covenant abilities have been nerfed again and again. But the main point here is that now is the time for tuning and balance. Big changes have happened, and many more changes are on the way. The dev team is focusing on Covenant abilities and Soulbind traits to make sure everything works well together, but most importantly, the vast majority of the system is balanced, so everyone has something to be happy about. Everyone has something that they're good at. We've seen massive nerfs to throughput on some classes and abilities to bring them down, buffs on the other side to bring some up. Some abilities have been changed and added to with new effects and interactions, and some abilities have been redesigned entirely. Literally, some of them just got whipped out and a new one got put in their place. So if you were looking into what your best Covenant is based upon DPS or healing throughput, and mainly the Covenant ability, maybe put a pin in that research for now. The dev team is still moving a lot of things around regarding Covenants and balance, so let's wait for the dust to settle before we start really comparing everything again. So it looks like the dev team is definitely using that extra time they bought with the release date to make Shadowlands as good as it can be. We have more balanced tuning, extra activities at endgame, and they're even going as far as to change a large part of one of the main features. But what do you think of the new Conduit changing system? Is this new Conduit Energy going to save the feature as a whole, or is it still just too restrictive? Would Conduits be better with absolutely no cooldown or limitations on swapping? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. If you want to explore what's left of the beta, ask us a couple questions, or maybe even help us get ready for Shadowlands, you can find us over at twitch.tv/KalaniTV. We stream every Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday and Saturday, and watching the stream and coming to say hi is one of the best ways you can support the channel right now. And if you ever wanted to be included in the long list of names at the end of every video, a subscription on Twitch is the easiest way to make that happen. You get a free sub to any Twitch channel if you have Amazon Prime too, so be sure to take advantage of that. A big thank you to everyone who subscribed on Twitch already, and to our supporters over on Patreon. You can see their names floating by on screen. If you want to join these lovely guys and gals, well, now you know how. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.